A recurring issue that I have with the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the introduction of characters and or their lore. Introducing a character with significant lore into the universe with its own extensive continuity can be a difficult task. If done incorrectly, it can feel like an underdeveloped inclusion that can harm the future of the character. The MCU does have an openness within their universe that can allow for the inclusion of many properties, but it is dependent on the scale and the implementation within the grander universe. It doesn't help if these characters and their lore were never mentioned before but now have a prominent presence. No foundation for their introduction to stand on. There are examples of characters with subtle groundwork for a foundation, but it's still dependent on the execution. But the execution can even be good enough to overcome a lack of groundwork. A character that I believe was able to deliver a perfect introduction after years of subtle groundwork in the MCU was Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther. Black Panther slash T'Challa was created in 1966 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby for Marvel Comics' Fantastic Four. A warrior king and protector of his people and land of the highly advanced Wakanda. Black Panther has retained a high level of popularity through the comics and various animated projects. This is due to a number of reasons. A prominent reason is his cultural significance. He and his own world of Wakanda within the Marvel Universe became an aspirational representative for the black community. Much of this audience could see themselves or escape into this prosperous world within the pages of a comic book. To quote Drain McDuffie, the Black Panther was the king of a mythical African country, where black people were visible in every position in society. Suddenly everything was possible. Before my astonished eyes, in the spaces of 15 pages, black people moved from invisible to inevitable. One fan who did see himself in the role of King T'Challa was actor Wesley Snipes. Snipes is a proclaimed fan of the comic book character. In the early 90s, with the permission and approval of Stan Lee, Snipes sought out a live-action adaptation of Black Panther and his nation of Wakanda. Being a project led by a person of color and being based on a story so explicitly built around people of color, it was at first difficult for the project to get picked up in the industry. It did eventually get the attention of Columbia. This was at the time Marvel licensed out their properties' film rights, Black Panther being among them. In very early development, the studio tapped John Singleton to serve as director. Singleton and Snipes met to discuss the project. Snipes recalls that Singleton's pitch was different from the source material. An emphasis on the character's role in society but stripped of the majority of his mythology. Some interesting ideas, but Singleton and Snipes didn't share the same vision. This is one of the factors that led to the project never fully being developed. Snipes seemed genuinely passionate about this project, about adapting this aspiring world of black culture. He wanted to be true to the comics in the way they represented an African nation with advanced technology and a flourishing society, protected by a compassionate, capable hero and leader. Snipes has reflected that he doubts that the technology available in the early 90s would have been able to produce the world of Wakanda. There are examples of films and filmmakers who were able to exceed the technological limitations of their time, but those examples are few, so I can understand his concern with not meeting the expectations of both himself and the audience. This project never entered production, and Snipes eventually moved on to star as Blade in his own Marvel movie trilogy. The film rights to the character returned to Marvel in the early 2000s. This is most likely the reason director Tim Story was unable to use the character in his Fantastic Four film series.
It's going to be Black Panther, maybe? Please.
It could be. He is definitely something I've talked about. I'm a fan of that character, and we'll see.
An idea that he had while developing the franchise for Fox, with Djimon Hounsou in mind for the role, in reference to the character's comic book debut. Black Panther's film rights returned to Marvel around the time they began to develop their own connected film franchise, utilizing the properties they had access to at the time. A Black Panther project was one of the titles among the first draft of the MCU. However, this entire draft would change into what became the first phase of the MCU. There was faint development of a possible Black Panther project as the early Phase 1 films were being developed. John Singleton was again approached by Marvel to develop either a Black Panther project or a Luke Cage project. Singleton seemed to be very intrigued by the opportunity to tell more prominent black stories, but neither project would pass this initial approach. This denied Black Panther to be a foundational character in the MCU in the same way Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor are, but he was able to have significant parts of his lore laid out in these early phases. The MCU has brought many more opportunities for Marvel properties that were shelved for potential future projects. In 2011, as the MCU was beginning to hit the zenith the following year with the Avengers, Marvel hired Mark Bailey to write a Black Panther project. Not much is known about this MCU draft of a Black Panther project, but it showed Marvel was still interested in the idea. Unfortunately, it would still be some time before seeing the character appear in live action.
And in terms of Black Panther, it's absolutely in development. And when you have something as rich as Wakanda and his backstory, and clearly Vibranium's been introduced in the universe already. I don't know when it will be exactly, but it's certainly, we have plans to bring him to life someday.
The MCU began with the potential for future growth. At first, the main trajectory was forward. The issue is that the Marvel Universe is one built on a foundation of influence or history. It's not a continuity that can just begin in 2008 and just move forward. 2008's Iron Man had very limited references to a greater world or universe of Marvels. Those references would be saved for the end credits scene featuring Nick Fury.
You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
And then all following projects. Like with the Incredible Hulk, the story was connected to the Super Soldier Serum, which sets up their planned Captain America project, a prequel project. This teased that the universe does have a history. Despite some behind-the-scenes worry for breaking the rubber band of audience acceptability of sci-fi and fantasy concepts, Thor and Captain America: The First Avenger were the projects to cement that the MCU is an open universe with an expanding past, present, and future. A universe with aliens, gods, super science, and superpowered beings. This allowed for there to be a wide range of potential inclusion of other Marvel stories in the future. With this openness, Marvel was allowed to make references to and have appearances of particular characters and properties from the source material, at least the ones they had access to at the time. Though without a solid plan of how and when they're properly introduced these properties, it is often a forgotten practice, ignored out of preference for not wanting to go in the direction of the reference, as they have had to steer away from early decisions in retcons that can harm the structure of the continuity. Or they often rely on the in-universe knowledge of these characters' existence to be restricted. Example, no mention of Hank Pym's Ant-Man or Pym particles before the debut film, as he was a top-secret operator.
Silly, I know. Propaganda. Tales to astonish.
This is a self-inflicted limitation that can make certain characters' history feel crammed into the greater lore. It isn't to say that the character's story beginning before modern day is a bad thing. Retcons are fine in moderation. It's just dependent on how it's written. This limited knowledge of a character can work for certain characters, especially one like Black Panther, whose lore allows him to be a protector who moves from the shadows. This is why I believe Black Panther had the perfect blend of references and use of his existence being private. Even if the creatives behind the scenes aren't certain of how or when they're properly introduce a character, they can still apply references to certain aspects of the lore. The inclusion of Black Panther is not just the character, it's the royal family, it's the nation of Wakanda, and it's the element of vibranium. Many elements of Black Panther's mythology are essentially tied to the Marvel Universe. With Marvel's access to the character and his surrounding properties, they had these elements present in the MCU, whether intentionally teasing the character or not.
That allow you to...
What about this one?
No, that's just a prototype.
What's it made of?
Vibranium.
Vibranium had a notable presence in the first two phases of the MCU. You can't mention the comic book element without immediately thinking of the character. Yes, the Savage Land is also known for vibranium, but I don't think Marvel was teasing a Kazar movie. The most prominent tease for a Black Panther project in the MCU, or at least a tease to the existence of the character in the franchise, came in 2015's Age of Ultron. 2015 was a very seminal moment for the franchise and studio and Black Panther's cinematic future. This is around the time Kevin Feige worked out a new agreement between Marvel Studios and their parent company Disney. The prior partnership had Feige and Marvel Studios report to Marvel CEO Ike Perlmutter. Perlmutter was one of the main opponents of a Black Panther solo project. He was an opponent for any project featuring a female lead or a lead of color, or possibly any lead outside of the basic cishet white man lead. Perlmutter cited the failures of previous female and black-led superhero films as the reason, believing that the failure of these films were due to the sex, gender, or race of the lead, and not because of the various other factors that contribute to an underperforming film. Being the CEO of Marvel, he of course had power over the film projects led by Kevin Feige. His out-of-date views of the world and of the audience put a bigoted limitation on the MCU by being unable to tell a diverse story. Feige and the studio seemed eager to tell more stories that represent their vast audience. This is what finally motivated Feige to talk to CEO Bob Iger of Disney about a new deal. Feige would now only need to report directly to Alan Horn at Disney. This cut out the middleman of Perlmutter. The studio was now no longer limited in the type of stories they could tell. With this new creative control, Marvel Studios began to explore more diverse concepts and stories. In 2015's Age of Ultron, there was clear reference to the existence of Wakanda.
What dialect?
Wakanda, Wakanda.
Vibranium continues to be present in the universe as it plays a key part in the plot. The debut appearance of Andy Serkis's Ulysses Claw. The character is said to have a history as an arms dealer with a specialty in vibranium. It also appears that the character's files shown in the film has references to a history between him and the Wakandan royal family, but nothing too specific. This allows for an openness for the future. Clear and simple groundwork. 2015 is the year when Captain America Civil War is announced for a 2016 film release. Among the cast will have Chadwick Boseman play the character Black Panther / T'Challa. Boseman had auditioned for the role of Drax the Destroyer for James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, but casting director Sarah Finn instead brought him back for the role of Black Panther. The two pairs of directors and writers from Captain America Winter Soldier returned for the character's sequel. During early development, the story was to mainly be a direct sequel to the previous film with a focus on Captain America and Bucky's relationship. That focus remained, but Feige suggested for the story to be an adaptation of the Civil War storyline by Mark Millar and Steve McNiven. At first a difficult task, as the MCU wouldn't be able to match the scale of the comic book storyline. The creative team did manage to blend their original intent of furthering the main relationship of the story and execute an adaptation of the storyline that works within the MCU. After a new deal with Sony that made the development process difficult, the creative team were allowed to use the character of Spider-Man in the film, debuting into the MCU alongside Black Panther. They decided to use these debuting characters as a way to explore the different themes and perspectives within the story, a fresh view on the events among a cast so familiar with each other. Introducing a character into a group setting like this can be dangerous for the creatives to steer into delivering too much expository information and not enough actual character development. They can feel like a shallow inclusion that should have been saved for later. Feige has had this worry towards characters like Captain Marvel when Joss Whedon wanted her in Age of Ultron. Feige did so out of a main concern of the character not being allowed to have enough development in the team-oriented film. This concern didn't seem to follow for Black Panther's inclusion in this supposed Captain America solo title that would feature several prominent characters, though they were able to deliver on establishing the foundation of the character in a number of ways. Boseman approached the character with a high level of professionalism. He made the character stand out among a roster of pre-established characters, truly feeling like a new character with a cloak of mystique, but with a sense of clear purpose and motivation that added so much to the movie. With the writing and phenomenal acting, it delivers an introspective and visible evolution of these motivations. He wasn't just another version of a character or just tagged along with the others. He stood on his own. He had his own voice and his own path to travel. The script gave him a prominent role as the death of the Wakandans and then the death of his father were pivotal moments. It was his performance that really added depth to the character. He took influences from the source material of the comics and real-world inspirations that allowed him to better develop the character. There was a subtleness to the performance at times that made the audience know that there was much more lying beneath the exterior of the character. The writers felt that the best way to introduce and include the character was for him to have a history. It would have harmed the flow of the movie and wouldn't have done the character justice if it just had his origin jammed into the story. He was allowed a running start. We were introduced to the character on a foundation established through previous in-universe references and in-movie dynamics and interactions that make for the final full reveal of Black Panther to be satisfying. Knowing who the character is as a character, the fundamentals of his origin and lore is explained in dialogue to other characters. This allows the audience to still formulate the basis of the character's mythology while being able to continue to move forward. There's not too much information for anyone unfamiliar with the character to digest. It's enough for them to understand and an easy entry point into the character. Then the story and the performance is what maintains the audience's interest. Prince T'Challa had been operating as the protector of Wakanda from the shadows for some time. Being a relatively isolated hero, he seems to only act when Wakandan citizens or resources are involved. In this case, he's out for revenge after the death of his nation's monarch and his father. The audience sees the character on an arc from a vengeful warrior to finding peace with the loss of his father. An intriguing emotional journey that immediately gets the audience attached to the character and eager for his future. We see who he is through his actions, through his evolution as a character. They weren't afraid to put him in an antagonistic role that, in the same movie, evolves to him standing beside the protagonist as an ally. There was nuance to his position in the film. He had his justified reasons for doing what he did and had the character maturity to move past and accept certain things. The audience were able to understand this evolving position, especially through the acting. The movie continued to introduce more of the character's significant lore, like the Dora Milaje, a top-tier guard of the Wakandan royal family, though they remain very particular about what they adapt. again not introducing too much too soon in such a limited time. The creatives leave open a plot thread from the film that they abandon to instead focus on the more intimate journey of the character, the fate of Wakandan's position in the world, whether or not the prince will continue his father's wish to open the secluded nation to the complex and ever-changing outside world. This left it open for future creatives to further explore the world of the character. To deliver a perfect introduction, it takes more than just having the character present. It's the writing, the performance, the approach, the amount of preparation, and the execution. The character can have a role varying in scale. They can have a simple appearance in only one scene, or be a fundamental main player. It can be dependent on the amount of intentional groundwork, having the audience be familiar with certain aspects of the character's lore to allow for an easier introduction. As I said, there can be appearances that vary in scale. Not every character demands a main part, but some are preferred to have a prominent role in their introductions, especially if done in a team setting such as this. The immediate solo project can dive deeper into the character upon introduction, but that usual method rarely allows for much interaction between their basic origin story and the rest of the MCU. Black Panther's introduction allows for him to share the screen with other prominent figures in the MCU and prove himself among them. When introducing the character in an ensemble film like this, it's important to find that core of the character, the fundamental characteristics that make them who they are, but allow for room to grow in future appearances. It's important to find an actor who can expand on those key elements, who can add so much to the character by utilizing every minute of screen time, to properly use every moment to further develop the character to deliver a perfect introduction. A solo Black Panther project was announced soon after the news of Captain America's Civil War. It was set to follow the events of the 2016 movie that featured the character. Director and writer Ryan Coogler was hired for the project, with the cast including the returning Chadwick Boseman, Michael B. Jordan, Angela Bassett, Letitia Wright, and Lupita Nyong'o. A proper introduction to the expansive world of Black Panther, and the intentional presence of the interior politics of the nation and interior struggles and dynamics of the cast. Audiences finally saw the culture of Wakanda in live action. The creative team took this adaptation very seriously. They wanted to honor the source material and the audience by infusing real-life cultural influences into this newly revealed side of the MCU. The evolution of the character continued through seminal projects that saw him in the vibrant universe that had always had his lore set in their foundation. The evolution of the character's world continues on in the wake of Boseman's tragic passing. The legacy of Chadwick Boseman left is truly inspiring. Even when he was ill, he continued to stand in the role that took 50 years to come alive. He understood the weight of the character's own legacy. He delivered in honoring that legacy and established his own in the process. He and the creative team created a prominent piece of representation that has inspired more to come. He stood proud in the face of an overwhelming situation to inspire hope in those who needed it most. He made the introduction of a character in a world of marvels feel so unique and human.